Okay, so we are now live. We have upwards of 30 participants on the line with us. Welcome, everybody. So let's
Welcome.
get started. Um, Hello. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, Reach for the Stars, Arts-Based Pedagogy as a Pathway to Excellence and Equity. My name is Nicole, and I am the Program Coordinator with Create California, the Collective Impact Coalition who's hosting this webinar today. We're excited to get started with the webinar, so I just want to go over some housekeeping. This webinar is going to be recorded, except for the latter portion of the webinar, it will not be recorded, but the beginning parts will be, and we'll also send it to you via email. In addition, please feel free to use the chat box function, which you will see at the bottom of your Zoom screen. In fact, we can test it out right now. So if you want to use the chat box function to let us know what organization you're with, what your affiliation with, the arts is, or your organizational affiliation is. Let us know in the chat box so we can get a sense of who's on the webinar with us. We'll have some interactive functions. There will be some light interaction during this webinar via the polling feature of Zoom, as well as this chat box function. So now, to get us started, I'd like to introduce Francisca Sanchez, who is going to be our facilitator today. She is the chair of our Create California Equity Committee, Create California Equity Committee. So Francisca, you can take it away.
Thank you, Nicole. Welcome, everyone. I'm just going to say a few words about CREATE and this issue of equity. As many of you know, CREATE's a coalition. It includes a number of leaders and organizations, all of us working together to create both sustainable and equitable access to the arts learning for every California student. And we really see this as essential to the development of our students' full creative potential while they're in school, but also beyond when they leave us. So at CREATE, we believe in the transformative power of the arts to move equity forward in our schools and communities. Nicole, you can move to the next slide. We believe in the emancipatory power of the arts to create counter-hegemonic artistic spaces for our students and educators to give voice to their full identities and their aspirations. And we know that without this access, our most vulnerable students are left without critical opportunities to become their full and best selves, to create themselves as powerful figures in their own lives and in the life of their communities. And so some time ago, our equity committee defined something that we call the Declaration of the Rights of All Students to Equity in Arts Learning. The Declaration sets out 6 fundamental rights. And Nicole, if you can move. And these are rights that we believe every student has with regard to the arts. We believe that students have the right to equitable access, both to and outcomes in the arts. We believe that students have the right to protections from any sort of policy, practice, or other barrier that might exclude them from full participation in the arts. We believe that arts learning is a right, and we want arts learning that's culturally and linguistically responsive and relevant. We believe that all of our students have the right to all the resources needed, including qualified staff, to engage successfully in the arts. We believe that educators, leaders, and our community are, in order for this to be true, that they need to be knowledgeable about the powerful benefits of the arts. We believe that our schools and community environments have to be ones that value and protect the arts as essential to the development of our students' full potential. So this is the declaration, many of you have adopted the declaration, but we know that people are at different places. And so one of the things that we want to do is just a very quick little poll here that tells us about who you are, who's in the room, so to speak, and your status relative to the declaration. So we're going to ask you right now to take the poll with us. It should be up on your screen.
Okay.
And Nicole, you'll tell us when we're ready to move on.
Yep, we are almost there. Got 31, 32, 33. We'll get to 40 hopefully. Or I guess stopped at 33, 34. Get to 35. Okay. Okay. We will go ahead and end the poll.
Thank you so much.
Awesome. Very cool. Yeah, just so you guys can see a little bit of the poll results. Quick snapshot. We've got a lot of administrators on here, but some community arts partners, and we've got educators, artists, and parents. Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Okay.
I'm going to take a moment now to introduce our three presenters. We have Dr. Yvette Jackson, who is an adjunct professor at Teachers College at Columbia University. She's the author of The Pedagogy of Confidence, which many of us have been using in trying to understand more deeply how it is that we need to recreate our classrooms and our schools in order to ensure that every student, but particularly our most underserved students, are able to achieve at full volume. She is a well-known speaker and presenter, and she brings to us this very amazing sense of the power we have to actually change the conditions in our schools and in our classrooms. She was the CEO of the National Urban Alliance, and through that work, she has committed so many of her resources to being in schools, in districts, working with teachers and administrators. Secondly, we have Breon Bain. He is currently a professor at UCLA. He's a well-known hip-hop theater innovator and a prison activist. He's been working in prisons with incarcerated youth, with incarcerated women and men, to help bring to them some of the opportunities to give voice to who they are and to continue their education so that when they come back into our communities, they're better prepared to contribute to the full scale of what's available and what we need. He has a one-man show called Lyrics from Lockdown, which is based on his unlawful incarceration by the New York Police Department while he was at Harvard Law School. So we're glad that he's going to be with us as well. And we are so delighted to have with us Sky Walker, who is a senior at Oakland School for the Arts. She's a musician and composer, and she's going to be sharing some of her original work with us. And what I'd like to do now is actually turn it over to Sky and ask her before she starts her performance if she would like to tell us a little bit about her art story and the origins of the piece that she's going to be sharing with us. Sky?
Hello everyone, good morning. I started music seriously in high school. I tended to lose a lot of family members and I didn't have a way to express my feelings, and I found out that talking really wasn't the way for me, so I ended up picking up ukulele. randomly one night I just asked my grandmother for a ukulele, and she's like, okay. So we went to the store, we got it, and I taught myself how to play it. I started taking my singing seriously. I auditioned for Oakland School for the Arts, which I got in for the vocal department. And then I started writing my own music about 2 years ago. Um, this song I wrote is called Our Home, and it's basically explaining all the tribulations from gentrification happening around the Bay Area. And I feel like a lot of students didn't really have a voice for that. So I put in a bunch of what students were saying to me into my music. So therefore, they have an easier way to express their feelings. So.
You can start at any time, Sky.
Oh, okay. This is Our Home by me. I wake up and watch my childhood falling down into a new town. No more kids running around. All the playgrounds have been torn down. New businesses, new buildings for a new crowd, a new crowd. And poverty increasing, my neighbors are leaving from a place they always knew. And the mother's going crazy. They struggle on a daily, 'cause they can't afford to feed their babies. This is our home. Where do we go? There's no place to run. This is what we know, what we know. Families living on the streets, way too cold to hear their own heartbeat. Young black girls afraid to take the bar train. All the killings make them go insane, and the prices are rising, and people are dying. Is it all for the money? Everyone keeps moving in, but discriminators for our skin. Why is everything a competition? This is our home. Where do we go? There's no place to run. This is what we know, what we know. This is our home. Where do we go? There's no place to run. This is what we know, what we know. Thank you.
Woo!
That was great.
Thank
Did
you
it.
so much.
It was
I appreciate
great.
it.
Thank
When is
you.
the album dropping?
Yeah.
I'm going to ask Yvette if she might want to start her piece by commenting on her response to Sky or reaction.
First of all, Sky, you are so gifted. The beauty of what you did, though, was to actually demonstrate how important the arts are as a valve for all of us to really share and express ourselves in ways that often we can't do.
Right.
And that is the beauty of what you did. The other thing is, because you were expressing yourself that way, though, was what I heard was you really talking about the human experience. I mean,
Yeah.
it seems like they're only your experiences, but the beauty of it is when people hear you, they can relate to it. And that's the beauty of the art. You have a diversity of form, definitely using the ukulele. That is a first. I haven't heard anybody your the ukulele, although it is become popular again. So I'm glad to hear you doing that. But the point is that might be a diverse form, but what you're saying is the human experience, and that's what joins us all together. So bravo. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
You're
The
welcome.
song will be out soon. I'm still recording, but it should be out within a couple of weeks. So I'll let you guys
Can't
know.
wait for it.
That's
Please, please do.
Yes.
That's great. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So, Nicole, do I have the access to control this now, or?
Yeah, you should have the access
Okay.
at the top of your screen just to take control from me. So I'm just waiting for you to get the control. I've shared the remote control with you.
Okay. Okay. I'm going to give it a try. If the audience can, I am forwarding, but I'm not seeing anything happen. Shall we do it that way? Will you just control it?
Yeah, that should be fine. So we can do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because you were the one who just put forward, right? That was just you who advanced the slide.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I don't seem to be able to do it. So I will just start anyway. First of all, again, Sky, thank you. Thank you for sharing your gifts with us. And that is the basis of why I wrote The Pedagogy of Confidence. You know, I believe that, like Sky, all of us have the potential for giftedness and for bringing forward the strengths that we have. And as a matter of fact, this idea of bringing forth the strengths that we have is what I call this vehicle for equity, meaning a pedagogy of confidence, using then the instruments, our personal instruments, to bring forward the strengths that we have, is what I'm going to talk to and show how the arts are the major medium for that. Okay, Nicole, I'll just say okay. All right, so what I'm going to do is really share with you the science behind this work to really substantiate the fact that each and every one of you watching this show has not only the potential, but the need to develop strengths. That's why we're all born here. We are born to develop a strength and then make a contribution with that strength to society. That's what Sky is doing. You will hear Breon, he's making those contributions. But we all have that within us. All we have to do is look for that format that's going to best illustrate that. And for you teachers and artists who are watching, how do you help us with our students to use the different tools that you have available to really elicit those strengths? Next. So the first person I want to talk about here that I think is so interesting, as you will see on the slide, is Albert Einstein. And why do I share him? First of all, every time I ask people who do they think an individual is who is gifted, alive or dead, he is almost always the first one someone names. because of his contribution. The thing about this is twofold. One is that he has said that he attributes his innovation, his creativity, to his time being spent with artists, that it is through the artist and his associations that he learned to be thinking outside of the box, to really pursue not only what it is he has internally, but to kind of look for other ways of expressing that. That is the arts. That is brilliant, because people don't usually make that association with him, but that is powerful. The other thing that's on the screen is to see where there was an article recently done that talks about why there's no such thing as a gifted child. Now, they use that title kind of tongue-in-cheek. What they're really saying is all of us are gifted, and that they talk about the fact that even Einstein, when he was a young person, wasn't remarkable, but it wasn't until he found his passion, the passion like that Sky has, the passion you will see with Breon, when he brought that forward all of a sudden and used the arts, his mind has clicked, or had clicked, to this place of really extravagant unordinariness, his giftedness. Next. And so when we talk about, I see that I think on the screen, it should say propensate. What that really means is that all of us have the potential for gifting, being gifted and gifting others. Next. So one of the things I want to bring forward here is, since we're talking about the arts, people usually associate culture with the arts, and they should, but we'll also talk about that more expansively. But I have a student in the middle of this, because what I'd like to show, and just like Einstein, there are things that affect how we communicate our meaning, how we really move forward this idea of who we are inside, just like Sky did. She has a culture that she was sharing with you. Next. And it's that culture that affects how she makes meaning, how we all make meaning. The cultural frame of reference is so incredibly important to understand that those things that are relevant and meaningful to us are what brings our gifts forward. Next. And so when we look at this slide right here now with all of its different elements, we can see that, again, this idea of cognition is framed in culture. The things, again, that are meaningful and relevant, they affect language. They also then, the language affects how we make meaning. But when I have cognition here, I want you to realize that art is such a beautiful format for helping us not only making that meaning, but sharing how we have made that meaning. Next. And so we're right there, you see Lev Vygotsky. And he was one of the first ones to really pay attribution to the fact that culture is so important. Next. And so you can just read there that what he is actually saying is that language and culture are frameworks for how we think. Now, I'm sharing all this with you for two reasons. One is to show how the arts are part of our cultural framework. And that is so important because they affect how we make meaning, and they give us language. So the language is not only the words that we're using, but the artistic forms that we use. Next. Nicole? Okay, so engagement and value. That is what the culture that we're discussing right now do for us. They give us value because our culture is our strength, and they engage us. That's what the arts do for us. They add, they expand our frame so we can be engaged, so we can feel this sense of value. Next. So I wanted to share with you a brilliant mind, Ernest Boyer, and he is a person whom I did a lot of research on. And one of the things I want to share again is, as we think about making meaning, I love his quote here. It says, music gives us a language that actually goes across the disciplines. And I'm just looking because what's happening, I'm reading this, but it's hard because all the pictures are in front of me. Nicole, meaning I'm seeing all the presenters on there. So I'm only getting part of what I'm reading. Is there a way that I can just eliminate everybody's picture so that I can see the rest of each slide?
Yeah, if you want to, let's hide all the
Yeah, that would be great. That would be helpful.
non-video.
Is that something I have control of, or?
Yeah, you can actually hide. You can minimize the videos yourself for your.
Okay, got it. Okay, audience, sorry for that technical issue, but the beauty of technology. Anyway, so music gives us a language that cuts across the disciplines, helps us to see connections, and brings a more coherent meaning to our world. Now, why do I share that? Because again, we had Sky just now. We're talking about this idea of cognition, but we're showing that when we talk about not only how we make meaning, but how we share it, that there are these different art forms that allow us to do that with such profound insight. Look at what else he says there. He says, especially when we talk about this idea of sharing thought, he says, writing is freezing thought. Reading is unlocking thought, but the arts are thought that often can't be described in words. I just think that that is so beautiful, because when we think about the other Skies in the world, the other students like her who are saying, I have so much to say and sometimes I just can't use it or share it through the usual academic forms, the arts offer that. Next. And so this is your opportunity now for a little reflection, audience, just in terms of what Ernest Boyer shares with us and coming behind what Sky did. What do the arts do for you when you think about it in terms of sharing the meaning you've made? So just take a few seconds. You can chat with us also, if you want to, give a little question there, but this is really more for reflection. It's really important when you're processing information to take a little time to reflect. So again, what I'm asking you to do is just reflect on this idea of the beauty of the arts, not only as an expression, but for constructing meaning that goes beyond often other ways that we are making meaning academically. Okay, next. All right, so again, we're back to this idea of the beauty of the arts, but specifically now I want to go into this idea of why arts are so important for an equity consciousness. That this idea of using the arts and the fact that it can help unlock such brilliance, such gifts in individuals, such deep thought, is why they are so important to equity. Because often educators, what we have been trained to do is just look at data on test scores, and that is so limiting. And when you have the arts for everybody, it unleashes profound potential that may not otherwise be identified. And so if we're really going to be conscious about equity, we will have the arts for everyone, and we will use what we find out through their use of the art, where their gifts are, and how we can really situate them in not only their own learning, but to be prepared to make these wonderful contributions to the world. Next. So this becomes important because in an equity consciousness where we deeply believe that all students, all of us, are wired for high intellectual performances, and the desire, we are born with desire to be inquisitive, to be engaged in learning and self-actualized. We all are born with that. Again, the arts help us to do that. But given the fact that we all are wired, next, the question becomes, why? What are the issues particular to students of color that disrupts their innate propensity for, question mark, for anything they go for, but really for their development? And so we're going to take an ecological perspective. That means we're not only going to think about the student, but what are the kinds of things that are barriers that really the arts help overcome. Next. And so again, we're back to that same symbolic representation, but I want you to look at it a little differently now, because now we're going to talk about that frame of reference again, the culture, and look at what happens to so many students of color that have affected them in terms of their comfort or their ability to express their gifts. Next. And so for students of color or students who are second language learners, the frame of reference, or the cultural frame of reference, doesn't only affect how they see the world, how we make meaning, but next, this idea of how they think the world sees them. So in other words, because of how they have been situated to have been narrated by others in terms of who they are, or really minoritized, they often feel less than. Next. So when we think about that, this is not only what has happened overall outside of school in terms of where they might be prejudiced, that really affects their self-esteem. But I just want to share with you some of the terminology that is used in schools, and especially the educators who are looking at this. Look at the terminology and think about the impact of these terms on the esteem and the self-confidence of an individual. Like using where it says subgroup, there are terms now on the federal forms that actually say people of color should be considered subgroups now. When you think about linguistics, sub means under, right? So what does that imply? Or even minority meaning less than, or low achiever, that implies some children just aren't going to be able to achieve, and that is wrong. We're really changing the lexicon to say, instead of using the minimizing, otherizing terms that are on the left, let's think about, one, the impact those terms have, and look at how we should be rephrasing. So instead of low achiever, maybe some have underdeveloped skills, but we can develop them, and the arts are so important for that. We talk about students being disadvantaged when really so many of them are school dependent. That means that they are relying on us to provide the arts and the other kinds of supports so that then they can perform at their highest levels. Or even the terminology disability, as if when somebody has a challenge in learning, they have total disability. They're incapable, and that's so untrue. They just have a variable learning style. The next is this idea of using that term, the gap, that perpetuates this idea of looking at races, different races, and I'm using this as a quote, as less than. Well, what we really mean is these are students who need support and even more enrichment. Next. And that takes us to the impact of this, again, these issues on self-esteem, that real need to move forward. So as Sky expressed, she can express her own strength and she can feel the worth that she not only has personally, but what she is contributing. Next. And so I share here, because we make that segue, how do we help change that paradigm of less than and otherizing? And so I'd like to introduce, many of you, I'm sure, recognize that this is Misty Copeland. And one of the things that happened to Misty was when she was attempting to really go into the arts, meaning specifically ballet, and tried out for different institutions or theater companies or balletic companies, she was told that she didn't have the right body form for that. That again, that otherizing. But she had such belief that she worked so hard to develop for herself her art form. And as you know, now she is the prima ballerina for the American Ballet Theater. But that is because behind the scenes, aside from those saying she couldn't, she had those who were saying, yes, she can. And she developed a strong belief in herself. That is what the art form did for her. And it gave her such passion that she is now a prima ballerina. Next. Next. So we're going to look at, again, this idea of the pedagogy of confidence. How do we take those barriers and mitigate for them so we can, again, elicit those strengths in students? Next. Back to that science. Next. That brings us to what I identify and call the high operational practices. That means, what are the practices based on science that really contribute to bringing forward the gifts in all of us? And the first one is the identifying and activating strengths. Why is that so important? Because for so many, school has been based on identifying deficits. And when we identify deficits as really the focus, what winds up happening is we lose the potential, the propensity that all the other skies and the Misty Copelands have in this world. The building relationships, how important that is, and how the arts not only help students in terms of making relationships among artists and those who are mentoring them, but seeing the relationship between art and the world. The idea of nurturing high intellectual performance. Art is a high intellectual performance. That is what it is. Often people don't look at arts that way. They think that it's cultural, it's enrichment, but they don't think high intellectual performance, and it is. All art forms are. How we provide enrichment and how important the arts are as part of that enrichment. How arts can be used to actually be prerequisites for learning content in different disciplines. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute. How arts help situate learning for students in their world, because they make the connection from themselves, personally, emotionally, to the world. And the last one is, like the art form of music did for Misty, it amplified her voice. Next. And so let's get more specific now in terms of this idea of the arts and inspiring strengths. You know, when we talk about strengths, you say, well, how does anybody develop a strength? First of all, they get exposure, they develop some interest, some passion, they practice, and they become innovative. That is what happened, as you saw with Sky. That is what happens to all artists. But the issue here, the real important one, is how arts inspire students so they build up the interest to move to a place of finding where their strength is. Next. I just want to share here this idea of strengths. I won't take a lot of time, but just from a neurobiological level, that is a neuron. One of the things we know is what's important to developing intellectual processing is the amount of dendrites. You see 5 dendrites. The 6th one is actually called an axon. But the more dendrites there are in a neuron, the more propensity for high-level performing. And what I'm sharing here is how important the arts are for that, for building new dendritic growth. The axon has, that's the one that was just named, has what's called a myelin sheath around it, meaning that's what helps. It's like insulation for electric current in the brain to be passed through. And again, how do you build the myelin sheath then so that electric current can then go through to the dendrites of surrounding neurons? Next. One thing is we connect new learning to past experience. And the last one is we connect and build on strengths. And again, why am I sharing this? Because when you build strengths through the arts, that strength that then builds the myelin sheath, builds connectivity, can also play out through the other disciplines. Next. And what happens and why those things can connect, or those dendrites can connect to others, is that when you are functioning from a place of strength, when you are getting enriched, your body is letting off endorphins and dopamine. They are neurotransmitters to help the current across the brain again. Next. Again, the arts, the importance of the arts in really building up neural interactions and capacity is so critical, because when you are in an art form and you are enjoying that art form, again, the endorphins and the dopamine are going off. Next. That brings us back to the slide that I shared earlier, again with engagement. Next. So I want to just close by looking more specifically at, so how do the arts expand one's frame of reference, previous slide, that culture, for academic learning and high intellectual performances. Well, first of all, through the arts, we develop language that is not only so important in how we express ourselves, but the language that we are tested on through things like the SATs. The language that we develop through the arts help our writing. They help concept development across the disciplines. They help how we comprehend the world, which then plays out throughout the other disciplines. The social studies, the academic cultural references. I have social studies there because the arts help us study periods of time. Next. Let's just look at some of the language that I was referring to. Terms like asymmetric, automatism, avant-garde, belle epoque, biomorphic. I mean, you can just read them. All of these are terms that are from the arts, but they go across the disciplines. So when we put students in active work, interaction with the arts, again, they're building language that is profound. Next. A little reflection, but I won't take long for the reflection because I really want us to get to Breon because he puts all this together for us in such a beautiful artistic way. But I just have you as we go on to reflect on the power of what I just shared. Next. Just two, happens to be a beautiful artwork that is actually on display in New York at the Brooklyn Museum, and I'm sharing with you because what this beauty of this picture is, this is supposed to be place settings for different women from history. And I share this with you because when we look at art to be able to open up history, it becomes profound. Next. This is just a little closer image of the different place settings. Next. Obviously, we all know what this is. Again, we're talking about how the arts bring history forward and the beauty of Hamilton in terms of the art form being used to bring that history forward. Next. And then, again, bringing back to this idea that we all have this need to connect to our own culture. That's what sociocultural deprivation means, bringing in our own culture and not being denied that. Next. That brings us to just one person that some of you might not even know of because he was blacklisted in the 1930s and 40s, but Paul Robeson. I share that with you because as a person who was blacklisted, he was only the third African American to go to Rutgers, but wound up then being, you can read, an actor, looked at as Phi Beta Kappa. I'm sharing this with you though, because if you look at the top, he was in Glee Club, he was in debate. He used the arts to bring his self-confidence forward. So then he was like a Leonardo da Vinci in terms of being gifted in many areas, but it's the arts that help release that. Next. And I think we don't need any introduction, but I love to talk about our artist here, Frida Kahlo, because why? She says, I am my own muse. I am the subject I know best, the subject I want to know better. She gives an image. She gives this inspiration to all of us to look at who we are internally and use the arts to describe that. Continue. I'm only sharing these other art forms to make the point, one, how art can show history, but also how art really releases us in terms of being described or having our own way of describing who we are. Next. Again, art form showing history. Next. Again, we're back to Lynn. Why am I showing this? Because he was expressing himself in terms of his own personal environment and how that helped him develop the great capacity that he has. Next. The idea of using the arts to amplify student voice in school then becomes so critical. Continue. Art form, students learning to express themselves in other ways. Next. I don't know how many of you know black violins, but they are some brilliant musicians, and they use music to express and share the beauty of who they are, but also how they can make meaning. Next. The arts for inspiring high intellectual performance. That is why the work is so important. Next. I leave you with this idea of your own pedagogy for you who are educators, bringing forward the need for the arts, for the confidence for our students to bring their strengths. Next. So we all have to rise up and stand up for the importance of the arts. Thank you.
And now I'd like to invite Sky if she has any comments or responses to what Yvette has just shared. Be great to hear a little bit from you.
That was spot on. Wow, like spot on. Music is music and just any art form is a way for youth to escape from reality and make reality as well, a better reality for them in the future. For me personally, I don't know where I'd be without the art form. Like, I do draw, I do like learning how to sing, and music has honestly been my medicine since I could remember, and you just validated that too perfectly.
Thank you so
Well,
much.
we make a good pair, Sky.
Huh, thank you.
I'm gonna turn it over to Brian, and he might want to make some comments and then connect to your own comments.
Thank you. It's so much there. I have so much to respond to. I hardly know if I'll be able to get to the comments I was hoping to make. But first of all, Sky, how old are you?
I'm 17.
Wow, amazing.
Thank you.
So just thank you for your gift. Thank you for your work. And Yvette, no, it's a blessing to be here with y'all. Yvette, I'm always inspired and always learn so much from you. So thank you.
Likewise.
And thank you, Francisco, for bringing it together. So the story that I want to start with really is just about my own, when I was younger than Sky, when I was 15 and was starting as an artist. I was singing at an early age, but one of my most memorable experiences was at 15, we wanted this sister named Paula Medina to manage our group. My two brothers, my two cousins, we were singing, we were rapping, we were doing poetry, and we really wanted Paula Medina to manage us because she had the hookup. She was all the New York artists, you know, Tracy Morgan before he was anybody, you know, all these, she got those folks on the bill. We wanted her to represent us, to help guide our career. And we met with her and she said, you know what, I have a show coming up in a prison. If you do the show in the prison, then, you know, I'll take y'all on. And so we were a little nervous, but we did the show and it changed our lives. You know, we went back every year for 10 years and, you know, people in prisons are the easiest people in the world to forget about. So the fact that we didn't forget about these brothers who looked like our uncles, our cousins, our brothers, our fathers, you know, it meant a lot to them. And that experience changed my life. 10 years later, I found myself in a correctional facility without the option to leave. And it changed the way I saw it when it wasn't on a voluntary basis. And I really went from being an artist to thinking about how I could be an activist in prisons, be an educator in prisons. And I really began to realize how much art really changes lives and saves lives from my own personal journey. You know, the one brother who didn't stay involved with the group, you know, he is doing federal time right now in a prison in Maryland, right? The other brother who who was in the group, although he was told by his principal in high school he was going to be dead or in prison by the time he was 25, he, you know, followed his art. And he went on tour with B.B. Winans and Stephanie Mills and Malik Yoba, did gospel musicals all over the country, and, you know, is still an artist and uses the creativity in work that he does even in the biggest projects in the country to do violence prevention, because folks know him as somebody who's a creative thinker. And I think the idea of creativity is not an option is so important. The only thing I would add to that after the colon is art saves lives, right? Because I've seen that in my own life, in my own story. So I really I have a video I want to share. I want to share a piece perform a piece of spoken word. Sky, I'm wondering if maybe you could bring back that beat in a minute. We could do a little impromptu collaboration.
Yeah, I can play anything.
All right, I'm gonna give you a little time. We're gonna close with that one. All right,
Okay.
that's the yeah, they don't even know that's coming because we didn't know it was coming. But we're gonna try that out. If I can get that the track, you can drop the volume 25% because I can't turn the vocals up so much, and we'll get a little collab going before we finish. All right.
Mm-hmm.
But really quickly, I want to before we show this video that I want to show. I want to say a few words about different series of art that I, as an artist, have been introduced to that inform the way that I think about art and its power as pedagogy and educational spaces. I was going to go to Robeson. Robeson was the mentor of my mentor. And so, Robeson, challenged these ideas about who could be an artist, right? He said, artists are the gatekeepers of truth. And we all have the capacity to be gatekeepers of truth. Interesting historical fact a lot of folks don't know is that Robeson and Einstein were tight. They were homies. Robeson and Einstein used to kick it.
Wow,
and Einstein
that's right.
actually went traveled to go see Robeson because he had heard about his legend and he was one of the artists who inspired Einstein. And when Robeson went to talk to Einstein, Robeson said to him, you should really, give a keynote speech at one of these historically black universities. Einstein gave a talk. It didn't make it into any of the press, but all the black press covered it, where he talked about white supremacy is a disease. Einstein, nobody talks about this. Einstein is not on record for any of this. But Einstein, actually, because of his relationship with Robeson, had a very sharp critique of racism and began thinking with Robeson about ways that art and science could work together in the ways that this webinar is working together to actually challenge those ideas. So I just want to bring that to the fore because it's important to think about those connections historically and what they mean today. So I think about that. I think about Picasso saying every child is an artist. The challenge is to remain an artist, right? I think we're taught part of the challenge of hyper-capitalism is that we're taught that people can only do one thing very well. You can only put the bottle caps on the Coca-Cola bottles on the assembly line. When in fact, right, we all have to be human is to have creativity, right? We're all creatures created by a creator and have the capacity to create. And so I want to challenge that idea and say we should celebrate and keep alive the artists in all of us, right? Whether or not we make our living that way or we just do that to sustain ourselves and our humanity, it's important that we recognize we all have that creative capacity as artists and we're born with it. And as Ken Robinson says, it gets educated out of us too often, right? So how do we think about art? What are the theories of art? Art as a tool is one way to think about it. Art is a way to sculpt the bench or the sculpture or to make works of art that are useful, have utility. We think about arts education. My sense of arts education is highly informed by the Brazilian educator and lawyer, actually, like me, turned educator, Paulo Freire, who believed that it should be a dialogue, not a monologue, right? We should think about not just what we're teaching and how we're teaching, but who we're teaching, right? And there should be a dialogue where we take into account the culture, the language, the experience, the literacies of folks as we create. And so I think artists have to know their audience. Educators have to know their audience and be in dialogue with the audience because to only be in monologue is to be oppressive. Medicine, Skywalker mentioned art as medicine, right? Art as therapy. We are all walking with different kinds of traumas, right? Historical group trauma, right? Intergenerational trauma. As people of color, as women, as folks living in a society that is on the verge of collapsing on itself with environmental disasters and on the verge of war between multiple countries, we are constantly in a state of crisis. The level of stress that we're under and the experiences that we have with violence at every turn, living in a country that has not dealt with its history of racial violence, its history of gender violence, right? And we have not had the tribunals that we had in South Africa to deal with apartheid. We've not had the Nuremberg trials that we had in Germany after World War II. So we're dealing with all of this stress and trauma, and it hasn't been treated. Art and art therapy are powerful tools to get at that. Augusto Boal, Theater of the Oppressed from Brazil, in his book Rainbow of Desire, talks about art as a way to deal with our internalized oppression, our internalized trauma. And that's one of the ways that I think it's important to think about art. Art is resistance, right? Art as martial art, capoeira, right? Art as a way to defend ourselves, to protect ourselves through movement. Art as survival. I think about the spirituals, right? Swing low, sweet Harriet, coming for to carry us home. The blues, the coded language of Negro spirituals, of calypso music, right? I think of the Anne Bogart, the director, I had a chance to work with very briefly in New York, says that if we think about aesthetics, we think about anesthetics or anesthesia. What does anesthesia do? Anesthesia numbs you, right? Malcolm X used to say, you go to the dentist, get your tooth pulled, they put Novocaine in your mouth, and you're bleeding all over the place. They give it to you so you can suffer peacefully, right? They're numbing your senses. If that's what anesthesia does, the anesthetic does, the aesthetic should do the opposite. The aesthetic should wake you up. It should wake you up, should enliven your senses, should wake up your senses to realize who you are, to realize your full humanity, the humanity of other people. And that's a really important piece of art that I want to bring into the conversation. Link to the video that we're about to show, which I think also connects to an important visual artist named Banksy, who says that art should comfort the disturbed and disturb the comfortable. And so I want to give you a glimpse of some art being done in a space that where the women have been denied access to, so much of what we take for granted in our daily lives, as a way to think about how art can comfort the disturbed and disturb the comfortable. If we can go to the video, this is a video of women at the oldest prison for women in California, CIW, as a way to summarize my first UCLA course offered there, the pilot course, Narratives of Change.